In this lecture, we are going to discuss about reading an unknown number of inputs. So in the previous lectures, while we were studying about the while loop and the for loop, we have seen how to take a fixed number of inputs, or we ask the user to enter a number and that is considered as a fixed number, and that number of inputs were taken and we were working on that. Now, what if we don't know the number of inputs that we want to take? In that case, we need to see how we can work with it in C++ programming. So that is what we are going to discuss in this lecture. So let's get started. So as I said, so far we have been dealing with fixed number of inputs. So in the previous cases, we have seen how to add all numbers from 1 till a fixed number and from 1 till a fixed number given by the user. So this was what we studied when we discussed about the while loop and the for loop. So there we saw that in one case we gave a fixed number and we were adding the numbers from 1 till that fixed number. So for example 5. So if we gave 5 as a fixed number, then we were adding from 1 till 5. 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5. And then in the next case, we asked the user to enter the number till which he wants to do the addition. So if the user has entered a number, let's say 4. So that 4 is treated as the fixed number, and then we added 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4. So that is what we have been doing so far, that is working with the fixed number of inputs. Now the question is, how can we add an unknown number of values? That means we are going to get values from the user, but we are not sure how many values are going to be there. It could vary from time to time. So in that case, how are we supposed to add those values? So we have to ask the user to enter some numbers, and we don't know how many numbers the user is going to enter. And then we add them using our program. So this is what we have to accomplish, and we will see how we can do this using C++ programming. So as I said, we have to keep reading the numbers until there are no more numbers to read. So we will ask the user to enter the numbers, and the user will keep on entering numbers from the keyboard. So as long as the user is entering numbers from the keyboard, we have to keep accepting those numbers, and then a time will come when there are no more numbers to read. And when is that? We will see that when we move ahead. So till that we have to read all the numbers and then we have to add them. So here is an example. So if the user enters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we ask the user to enter some numbers and the user enters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So in this case, there are 5 numbers. So we have to add all these 5 numbers and we have to say that the sum is equal to 15, which is the sum of these 5 numbers. Or for example, let's say in another case, the user enters just 3 numbers, like here 4, 1 and 3. So we have to add this 4 plus 1 plus 3 and say that the sum is equal to 8. So this is what we want to do, and let's see how we can do this. So here is a program that is going to help us do what we just explained, that is reading an unknown number of inputs. So here we have our header specified and we have our main function, and inside the main function we have 2 variables of the type integer, which are sum and value, and the initial value of sum is set to 0 and the value of this variable value is set to 0 as well. That means they are both initialized to 0. Okay, now here in order to read until the end of file, calculating a running total of all values read. Now what do we mean by this? Let's see. So as I said, we have to keep on adding the values that is given by the user. So as long as the user is entering something or a valid number, we have to keep adding it. So for that we are going to use a while loop. So here we are using a while statement, and we have studied about while in one of the previous lectures. So if you have not watched it, you can watch it first in order to understand how the while loop works. So in this while statement, we know that we need to have a condition, and as long as the condition is true, the statement or the block of code inside this while will be executed. So here, what is the condition? The condition is a cin statement. We see that we are saying std cin, and we are taking the value that is actually entered by the user. So we see that we are using the istream or the cin as a condition inside while loop. So this is something different that we are seeing now. Usually we used to give some condition like we have seen in the previous lectures. But here we are treating the cin itself as a condition. Now we will see when it is going to be true. This means that as long as the user is entering a valid number, then we have to execute what is written inside the while block. So when is this statement going to be true? This statement will be true as long as the user enters a valid number. And what is a valid number? We see that value is an integer. So as long as the user keeps on entering a valid integer, this is going to give a true value, and as long as it is true, this will be executed. So inside this while we have this statement written here, sum plus equal to value, which is the same as sum equal to sum plus value. So whatever the user is entering, we are just keep on adding it to the variable called sum, whose initial value is 0. So suppose the user enters 1. So here we see that user enters 1. So this cin statement is true. So it will come here and it will add 1 to sum. So what is the initial value of sum? 0. So 0 plus 1, that will be added. And then it will come back to the while condition and it will check if the user is entering any other value again. So if the user is again entering a proper value, let's say the user enters 2, which is also a valid integer. So it will again come to this while loop and it will execute sum plus equal to value, which means sum equal to sum plus value. So the previous value of sum was 1. So now the user enters 2. So the new value of sum will be 1 plus 2, which is equal to 3. So this will keep on happening as long as this part is true. And when will it not be true? It will not be true when we enter an end of file value, or if we enter an invalid value here. That means if it is not an integer, at that time this will become false, and then we will come out of this while and then it will print out this cout statement sum equal to sum, that is the latest value of the variable sum, and then we print a new line. Okay, now we see here that in this while statement, there is only one line after that. There is only one statement after this while. So that is why we are not putting it under curly braces. So if you are having more than one statement inside your while, then you need to put the curly braces. But if you are having just one statement, it's okay not to put the curly braces as well. Okay, so here the important thing is this condition over here. So we see that the istream is used as a test condition. Why do I say istream? Because cin is the console input, which is a part of the input stream. So this is used as the test condition. So we need to talk a little bit more about this to understand how this is working. So we will talk a little more about using istream as a condition and what are the things that happen when we use istream as a condition. So this was the statement that we had, that is the condition inside our while. We are using this istream, that is cin, as the test condition for our while. So when we do this, when we use an istream as a condition, the effect is to test the state of the stream. So we are going to test the state of the stream, that is the state of this std_cin. So std_cin will have a true value if the value entered here is a valid number. So if the stream is valid, that is, if the stream hasn't encountered an error, then the test succeeds. So as I said, if the user is entering a proper value here, which is an integer, and if it is not an end of file value, then this will always be true. So that is why it says the test succeeds. Now an istream becomes invalid when we hit end of file or encounter an invalid input, such as reading a value that is not an integer. So this is the condition where this test condition will become false. So it will become false when this cin will encounter an end of file value. Now what is an end of file value? In case of Windows, if you press Ctrl plus Z on your keyboard and then press enter, that is treated as end of file value. And in case of operating systems like Linux, if you press Ctrl D and then if you press enter, that is treated as end of file value. So we will see that when we run our program. So if this cin is encountering an end of file value, or if it is encountering an invalid input. So what is invalid input here? We saw that value was an integer. So if we enter a value which is not an integer, then it becomes an invalid value. So at that time, this will become false. So an istream that is in an invalid state will cause the condition to yield false. So that is what we just said. Okay, so now let's just go back to our program again, since we have understood how using istream as a condition works. Alright, so coming back to our program, we will take this program and we will run it in our Visual Studio Code to see if it is working properly and if it is able to read unknown number of inputs and add them together correctly or not. Alright, so we come to our Visual Studio Code and here I have that same program written down, and now we are going to compile this program. So the name of our file is unip.cpp. So let me compile it using the G++ compiler. So we type G++ unip.cpp and we see that the program has compiled successfully and there are no errors. And here a.exe is the output file that is generated. So let us run the output file. So we type ./a.exe and we press enter, and we see that the program has been executed. Now we see that there is a cursor over here. Now what does this mean? This is waiting for the input from the user. So it has come to this line and it is waiting for input from the user. This cin is trying to get executed. So it is waiting here. So let me enter some values. So let's say 1. Now in order to enter the next value, you can either enter it using space or by pressing the enter or return key on your keyboard. So let me use the enter key. So here I will say 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so I've entered 5 values and I can enter how many ever values I want. Now after this 5, I want to stop. These are all the numbers that I want to enter. So how to come out of this while loop? So in order to come out of this while loop, I have to either enter the end of file value or an invalid value. So let me enter the end of file value that I talked about, which is Ctrl+Z. So Ctrl+Z. I press Ctrl+Z on my keyboard and then I press enter. Now we see it came out of this while loop because it encountered the end of file value and then it printed the value of sum, which is equal to 15. So the sum of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 is 15. So we see that it is executed correctly. Okay, now let's take one more example. Let us run this program once more. Okay, so I have run this program once more. Again, it is waiting for the input from the user. So this time let me enter 2 and instead of giving enter, let me use space this time. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 3, 4. So these many values I want to enter. Now in order to break from this loop, this time I will enter a value that is not an integer. That means I'm not going to enter the end of file value, but let me enter a value that is not an integer. So let me enter a letter over here, a character. Let's say I entered n. Now what will happen? If I press enter now, we see that it has broken out from the while loop and it has printed the sum over here. So the sum of these numbers that I have entered is 22 and I have entered an invalid entry here which is not an integer in order to break from my while loop. So that is how we can accept an unknown number of values from the user and we can add them together. So with that, I hope you have understood how we can use the istream as a test condition, and using that we can read unknown number of inputs from the user and we can break out from the while loop by entering the end of file value or an invalid value which will break from the while loop. So I hope this lecture about reading an unknown number of inputs is clear to you. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.